Most people think disappearing means losing. You stop answering. You leave the group chat. You spend a weekend alone. You turn down invitations. And almost immediately, someone assumes something is wrong. But what if the opposite is sometimes true? What if the moment you temporarily withdraw from the world is not the beginning of your isolation, but the beginning of your ability to hear yourself clearly? Because modern life has created a strange psychological expectation. If you are not constantly visible, available, and involved, you must be falling behind. And that belief quietly controls far more people than they realize. You wake up and check what everyone else is doing. You see the event you missed, the conversation you weren't part of, the opportunity someone else accepted, the weekend you spent at home while other people appeared to be living. And suddenly, being alone feels like evidence. But here's the strange part. The fear of missing out rarely makes people more engaged with life. It often makes them incapable of fully experiencing the life they're already living. You are at dinner, but checking your phone. You are watching a movie, but wondering what else is happening. You are working on something important, but thinking about the messages you haven't answered. Your body is in one place. Your attention is everywhere else. The paradox is brutal. The fear of missing out can cause you to miss the exact moment you are currently in. You can be present everywhere except your own life. And this is where strategic withdrawal begins to make psychological sense. Not disappearing because you hate people, not withdrawing because you are afraid of the world, but temporarily removing yourself from the constant demand to react to everything. Because when the external noise decreases, something uncomfortable often appears. Your own thoughts. At first, solitude can feel strangely loud. You reach for your phone without thinking. You turn on background noise while doing nothing. You check notifications that aren't there. That sounds like boredom. Except reality behaves differently. Sometimes what we call boredom is simply the nervous system experiencing the absence of stimulation for the first time in a long time. The mind has become accustomed to being interrupted before a thought can fully develop. A notification arrives. A video begins. A message appears. A new headline replaces the previous one. And gradually, deep thinking starts to feel unnatural. This is the hidden power of solitude. It does not magically make you wiser. It removes enough competing signals for you to notice what you actually think. You begin to recognize patterns you were too distracted to see. Why do you keep saying yes when you want to say no? Why do you keep returning to the same person? Why are you exhausted by goals you claim to want? Why does your life feel busy, but strangely directionless? But this creates another problem. Once you become quiet enough to notice your own thoughts, you may discover that many of your decisions were never entirely yours. Some were inherited from your friends. Some were shaped by social expectations. Some were simply reactions to what everyone else seemed to be doing. And suddenly, withdrawal stops being about escaping the world. It becomes a way of discovering how much of your behavior was being produced by the world. This is why disappearing can sometimes become transformative. When you stop performing your usual identity for a while, the identity itself begins to loosen. You are no longer the funny friend, the reliable employee, the person who always responds immediately, the one who is always available. And for a moment, you have to confront a disturbing question. Who are you when nobody is currently asking anything from you? Most people rush to answer that question. They fill the silence. They return to the group. They create another distraction because the answer may not be immediately comforting. But that discomfort is precisely what makes strategic withdrawal psychologically powerful. You do not withdraw to become less connected to life. You withdraw long enough to determine which connections are actually yours. And that distinction changes everything. Because eventually, you return. You answer the message. You attend the gathering. You re-enter the noise. But you are no longer responding to every signal with the same urgency. You begin to notice the difference between an invitation and an obligation, between connection and constant access, between being informed and being mentally occupied. And perhaps this is the deepest paradox of all. The person who is constantly available may not be the most connected person in the room. They may simply be the person who has never had enough silence to decide what deserves their attention. Strategic withdrawal is not the rejection of the world. It is a temporary refusal to let the world define the shape of your mind. Because sometimes, you have to disappear from everyone else's reality long enough to discover which parts of your own reality were never really yours. But once you understand what silence reveals, another question becomes impossible to ignore. What exactly are you being distracted from? Because attention is not just something you possess, it is something other people are constantly trying to acquire. Every day, entire industries compete for the same limited resource inside your mind, your attention. And they do not need to control your entire life to influence it. They only need to control what you look at next. A notification, a headline, a short video, a recommendation, a message designed to make you curious enough to click. The strange part is that most of these interruptions do not feel like interruptions. They feel like choices. You decide to check your phone. You decide to open the app. You decide to watch one more video. But here's the psychological reversal. The system does not need to force you to keep looking. It only needs to make stopping feel slightly less satisfying than continuing. That is the foundation of the attention marketplace. Your attention becomes valuable when it can be held, measured, predicted, and eventually sold. The longer you remain engaged, the more opportunities there are to influence what you think about, what you want, and what you eventually do. The most valuable thing you give away may be the thing you never notice leaving. And this is where technology becomes psychologically different from older forms of distraction. A television show ended. A newspaper had a final page. A conversation naturally reached a stopping point, but digital environments are designed differently. There is always another video, another post, another recommendation, another message, another reason to continue. The experience has no natural ending, and the human brain is extremely vulnerable to that structure, because occasionally, the next thing is interesting. Not always. Just often enough, you scroll past 10 things you do not care about. Then one catches your attention, and the brain learns a dangerous lesson. Maybe the next one will be the good one. So you continue, not because you are enjoying every moment, but because stopping means giving up the possibility of the next reward. That sounds simple, but this creates another problem. You may begin opening your phone without consciously deciding to. You walk into a room and forget why. You sit down to work and suddenly find yourself checking something unrelated. You finish one task and immediately search for stimulation before beginning the next. The behavior feels random, except it often isn't. Repeated exposure to instant stimulation can train the mind to expect constant novelty. And once that expectation becomes normal, ordinary activities begin to feel strangely difficult. Reading feels slow. Thinking feels tiring. Waiting feels uncomfortable. Even a quiet room can feel like something is missing. This is the digital hijack. Not because technology literally takes control of your mind, but because it gradually changes what your mind considers rewarding. The priority shifts. You may still say that your career matters, your relationships matter, your long-term goals matter, but behavior reveals something more complicated. The thing you repeatedly give attention to becomes psychologically important, whether you intended it to or not. Your priorities are not defined only by what you value. They are shaped by what repeatedly captures you. And then the problem becomes even more subtle, because modern distraction rarely destroys your entire day. It fragments it. You answer one message while working. You listen to something while eating. You check a notification while someone is talking. You switch between tasks because doing one thing suddenly feels too quiet. Each interruption seems insignificant. A few seconds, a few minutes, nothing dramatic. But the mind does not always return to the original task at the same depth. A thought disappears. A detail is forgotten. A decision becomes more impulsive. You reread the same sentence. You walk into the kitchen and forget what you needed. You begin 5 things and finish none of them with your full attention. This is cognitive fragmentation. The mind is technically active, but psychologically, it is scattered. And the paradox is almost invisible. You can feel incredibly busy while producing very little deep thought. You can consume information all day and still struggle to remember what you actually learned. You can communicate with dozens of people and still feel mentally alone. That sounds intelligent until you look closer. Multitasking often creates the feeling of productivity without the psychological experience of completion. The brain keeps switching, and every switch carries a cost. Not always a dramatic one. Sometimes it is simply the loss of momentum, the disappearance of a thought, the weakening of memory, the inability to remain with a difficult problem long enough for an original answer to emerge. And this is why strategic withdrawal becomes more than a lifestyle preference. It becomes a form of cognitive protection. When you step away from the constant marketplace of attention, you are not merely avoiding entertainment. You are temporarily removing the competing demands that keep breaking your thoughts into pieces. Because deep thinking requires something modern life increasingly makes uncomfortable: continuity. The ability to remain with one idea after the initial excitement disappears. To stay with a problem before the answer arrives. To experience silence without immediately filling it. To allow the mind to become bored long enough for something more complex to emerge. And perhaps this is the final psychological twist. The war for your attention is not really about whether you use technology. You will. The deeper question is whether your attention still belongs to you when nothing is demanding it. Because if you can only focus when something is stimulating you, then you are not fully directing your mind. You are waiting for something else to direct it for you. And that may be the hidden reason silence feels so powerful. Not because silence gives you more information, but because, for a brief moment, it removes everyone else's opportunity to decide what you should think about next. And once you begin protecting your attention, something unexpected happens. The first thing you notice is not clarity. It is discomfort. You sit down without your phone. No music, no video, no conversation. Nothing is happening. And suddenly, a few minutes can feel strangely long. You look around. You reach for something. You check the time. You wonder if this is what people mean by boredom. But here's the strange part. Boredom may not be the absence of thought. It may be the space where thought finally begins to reorganize itself. When the brain is constantly receiving information, it has very little reason to generate its own. Why invent an idea when another one is arriving every few seconds? Why explore a question when an answer can be searched instantly? Why imagine something when an endless stream of images is already doing the imagining for you? This is why boredom can feel uncomfortable at first. The mind is not necessarily empty. It is simply no longer being continuously fed. And when the input decreases, the brain begins searching internally. You remember something from years ago. You connect two unrelated ideas. You imagine a possibility you had not considered. You suddenly understand why a conversation bothered you. Boredom is often the moment the mind stops consuming and starts producing. That is the paradox. The feeling we spend so much time trying to eliminate may be the condition required for original thought. But creativity does not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it begins as a small mental movement, a question, a strange association, a memory connected to something completely unrelated, a thought that appears only because nothing else interrupted it. And this leads directly to the power of silence. Most people think silence is simply the absence of sound. Psychologically, it is much more than that. Silence changes the rhythm of processing. When there is no constant audio competing for attention, the brain has more room to notice subtle information. The emotional meaning behind a sentence, the thought that appears after the first thought, the discomfort underneath an automatic reaction. You may have noticed this while driving, or walking alone, or lying awake before sleep. A problem that seemed confusing earlier suddenly becomes clear. Nothing new was added. The information was already there. The noise was simply preventing the mind from arranging it. Except silence can also reveal something people do not always want to discover. Your mind may be noisier than your environment. You turn off the television, put down the phone, sit in a quiet room, and suddenly, the internal conversation becomes impossible to ignore. Regret, planning, anxiety, unfinished decisions, old conversations replaying themselves. This is why many people return to stimulation so quickly. They think they are escaping boredom. Sometimes they are escaping awareness. Silence does not create every thought you have. It reveals the thoughts noise was hiding. And once you understand that, the idea of a mental input diet begins to make sense. Your mind is constantly absorbing something. Images, opinions, arguments, advertisements, other people's priorities, other people's fears, other people's definitions of success. And unlike food, mental input often arrives without any sensation of consumption. You can spend an hour absorbing information and feel as if you did nothing. But the mind still processed it. It still registered the emotional tone, the comparison, the threat, the desire, the expectation. This is why protecting what enters your mind matters. Not because every piece of information is dangerous, but because repeated exposure gradually changes what feels normal. If you constantly watch conflict, the world can begin to feel hostile. If you constantly watch luxury, your own life can begin to feel inadequate. If you constantly consume urgency, calm can begin to feel like failure. The mind does not simply remember what it sees. It begins to use repeated exposure as evidence about reality. What enters your mind repeatedly eventually begins to feel like the world itself. But this creates another psychological contradiction. You can remove the obvious distractions and still remain mentally overloaded. No social media, no endless scrolling, But now you consume podcasts all day, videos while eating, music while working, news while waiting, information during every empty moment. The source has changed, the stimulation has not. And this is where a mental detox becomes different from simply taking a break from one application. The deeper process is removing the constant expectation that every moment must contain input. At first, the brain may resist. You feel restless, unproductive, uncomfortable. You suddenly notice how often you reach for stimulation automatically. But gradually, something begins to change. The gaps between thoughts become longer. Simple activities become more absorbing. A walk no longer feels incomplete without audio. A meal no longer requires a screen. A difficult question can remain unanswered without creating immediate panic. And slowly, the brain begins to recover something modern life quietly trains away: the ability to remain with an experience without demanding that it constantly entertain you. That may be the real purpose of mental detox. Not to become empty, not to reject information, not to live disconnected from the modern world, but to restore the ability to choose what deserves entry. Because the mind you experience is partly built from what you repeatedly allow inside it. And perhaps the deepest form of solitude is not being physically alone. It is reaching a point where your thoughts no longer require constant outside stimulation to exist. That is when boredom becomes creative, silence becomes informative, and withdrawal stops feeling like absence. Because sometimes the mind does not need more input to become more intelligent. It needs enough quiet to finally process what it already knows. But eventually, a difficult realization appears. You can understand attention. You can understand distraction. You can understand exactly why your brain keeps reaching for stimulation and still repeat the same behavior tomorrow. You wake up with a plan. Then you see the phone. You sit down to work. Then the notification appears. You intend to focus, but the environment has already started making decisions for you. And this is where most people misunderstand discipline. They believe focus is primarily a personality trait. Some people supposedly have it, others do not. But the environment around you may be influencing your behavior long before willpower gets the opportunity to intervene. Think about what happens when your phone is beside you. You may not touch it, but part of your mind knows it is there. A possibility is sitting within reach. A message could arrive, something interesting could be happening. And even when you are not checking the screen, a small portion of your attention remains psychologically connected to it. Now place the phone in another room. The task has not changed. You have not become more disciplined. But the behavior becomes easier. That sounds almost too simple. Except reality behaves differently. A large amount of human behavior is not driven by constant conscious decisions. It is triggered by proximity, visibility, convenience, sequence. The things you see repeatedly become easier to choose. The things within reach become easier to use. And the things requiring extra effort are often postponed. Your environment is constantly suggesting what to do next. This is the logic behind what might be called a digital monastery. Not a place where technology disappears forever. A controlled environment where technology stops competing for attention every few seconds. Your phone does not need to be destroyed. It may simply need to stop living beside your hand. Notifications do not need to control your day. They may simply need to stop interrupting every thought. The goal is not to become extreme. The goal is to remove unnecessary decisions, because every decision consumes some mental energy. Should I check this? Should I answer now? Should I open the app? Should I continue working? A focus-friendly environment answers some of those questions before you ever face them. The workspace has one purpose. The distracting applications are not immediately visible. The phone is physically separated. The task you want to complete is already prepared. The environment quietly removes the need to negotiate with yourself. And this is where the environment advantage becomes psychologically powerful. People often say, "I just need more willpower." But willpower is usually being asked to fight the same battle repeatedly. Every day, at the same location, with the same triggers, against the same convenient distractions. That sounds intelligent until you look closer. Why build an environment that constantly tempts you and then blame yourself for responding to it? If junk food is visible every time you enter the kitchen, you will think about it more often. If your phone is beside your bed, checking it becomes part of waking up. If your television is directly in front of your workspace, distraction becomes the default option. The environment does not force the behavior. It makes certain behaviors psychologically cheaper, and the brain tends to follow the cheaper path. This is why friction becomes such a powerful strategy. You do not always need to make good habits easier. Sometimes, you simply need to make bad habits slightly harder. Move the distracting app off the home screen. Log out. Put the phone across the room. Remove the automatic access. Not because you are weak, because every extra step creates a moment. And that moment is psychologically valuable. A habit often operates like a chain. Trigger, impulse, action, reward. Friction interrupts the chain. The pause creates a space where conscious choice can return. A small inconvenience can protect a large intention. But the most powerful triggers are often the ones you never consciously notice. You sit in a particular chair and immediately feel like watching something. You enter your bedroom and suddenly feel tired. You open your laptop and automatically check messages before doing anything important. You hear a notification sound from someone else's phone and instinctively reach for yours. The behavior seems spontaneous, but the environment may have been training the response for months. This is the invisible trigger. A location, a sound, a time of day, a visual object, even a specific emotional state. You feel stressed. You reach for the familiar distraction. Not because you made a careful decision, because your brain has learned the association. Stress means escape. Boredom means stimulation. Difficulty means avoidance. And once the association becomes automatic, the behavior can feel like personality. I am just someone who procrastinates. I cannot focus. I always need background noise. But perhaps the more accurate question is different. What happens immediately before the behavior? Because sometimes, changing the trigger is easier than fighting the behavior itself. And this brings the entire idea back to strategic withdrawal. The mind does not operate in isolation. It is constantly responding to signals. Some obvious, some invisible, some repeated so often that they no longer feel like signals at all. So the deepest form of focus may not come from becoming stronger than every distraction. It may come from building a world that asks less of your willpower. Because when the environment stops constantly pulling your attention away, something surprising happens. Focus begins to feel less like an achievement and more like the natural result of fewer things competing for your mind. And perhaps that is the final psychological shift. You do not always need to control yourself more. Sometimes, you need to stop designing your surroundings in a way that constantly requires control. Perhaps the greatest form of freedom is not escaping the world. It is becoming conscious of what you allow to control your attention. Thank you for spending this time with us at Relaxing Facts Studio.